is a man by the name of Robert E. Lee. And I'm reading a very, very lengthy biography of Robert E. Lee. And one of the problems that Lee had was he was an incredible gentleman. I mean, if you think about the stereotypical Southern gentleman, that's what he was. And one of the problems was when he would give commands during a battle, he would do so as a gentleman. And sometimes what he needed to do was get in somebody's face and yell at them with clarity. But sometimes he didn't do that. And so he would command more in the form of suggestion. And he would have phrases like, if it is practicable. That's not really the way to get somebody to do things. And it ended up causing some severe problems. And in fact, it was one of the main problems at the Battle of Gettysburg, which was the turning point as far as the decline of the South was concerned. And so sometimes there was an ambiguity. Sometimes there was a lack of clarity. No one could ever make the accusation that God had been unclear in laying out his commandments. Men could be unclear. Men could fog things up. God did not fog anything up here at all. He made it very, very clear. And so you have the Levites, and they're standing between these camps, and they cry out, and they say with a loud voice, "Cursed is the man who makes an idol or a molten image, an abomination to Yahweh, the work of the hands of the craftsman, and sets it up in secret." And then in their ears, in stereo, comes back the statement from the two camps, "Amen, it is true." Now, it should not shock any of us that the very first thing that is said, the very first curse that is uttered, is a curse against idolatry. For we know that fundamentally, when a people are focused passionately in love with their God, then the following of the rest of the law seems to come along. But when idolatry begins to move into the land, when there is amongst the people a weakening of that passion for God, or the diversion of some of that passion towards some other object, indeed, the rest is going to fall like a house of cards. And so you have the idols, the molten images, which are said to be toevah, an abomination to Yahweh. In fact, as we've pointed out before in the book of Isaiah, not only is the idol identified as an abomination, but the one who chooses to worship the idol is likewise called an abomination. Remember, you become like what you worship. If you want to worship an idol, you yourself become an abomination before God. You take on the characteristics of that which you worship. And so the first curse is upon this horrible and sadly all too frequent experience of the people of Israel. All through the Old Testament, we will read of the Asherim. We will read of the Baals. We will read of the high places. And what is this but syncretism? It is the bringing in of foreign worship. Sometimes people will think that it's okay to engage in the worship of these idols as long as you go and worship Yahweh as well, because that was the way people thought. There were multiple gods and they had control over various areas, and so there would be syncretism. There would be the joining together of the pure worship of God with the worship of others. But what was always eventually the result of this? Eventually you even have the bringing of these idols into the very temple itself. You have the utter degradation of the worship of God. It is done away with. They do not want to have any remembrance of that God who had made covenant with them, any remembrance of that God who demands of them holiness of life. And so the first curse against idolatry, that which is an abomination in the sight of Yahweh, the work of the hands of the craftsman, and sets it up even in secret. Even if someone were to do this only within their own home, oh, isn't that the the way we think today, as long as I'm not bothering anybody else, what I do in the secrecy of my own home. No. Any idolatry whatsoever, cursed is that man. And all the people shall answer and say, Amen. They say, yes, this is a true thing. They cannot come back later and say, well, that seems so harsh, but you said amen. You said it is true. You agreed to this. You're saying, we sing the amen. We may be the only people left on the planet who sing the amen. Actually, I was even at an OPC a couple weeks ago. And I made reference in the morning service to the fact that we might be a little more reformed than they are. Because even though they had the Trinity hymnal and even a Psalter, they didn't sing the Amen. Well, guess what they did that night? Yes, indeed. Now, I don't know if they're still doing it, but there are not too many people that do it. Well, what are we supposed to be doing when we sing the Amen? We're supposed to be giving our assent to the truthfulness of the sentiments that were expressed within that hymn. It's not just simply a way to have a nice resolving chord at the end, even though I'm not sure that we do a really good job of resolving that chord anyways. But that's not why you do it. It is supposed to be saying, what we have said is true. We are testifying of the truthfulness of that. That is what is going on in this text as well. Verse 16. Cursed is he who dishonors his father or mother, and all the people shall say, Amen. Right after idolatry comes the sanctity, the propriety of the family. First, the relationship to God. Secondly, the relationship to fellow man. And certainly this points to that most basic and foundational of human institutions, the family as established by God. And so the one who dishonors father or mother is said to be cursed, and the people agree to this. And certainly we saw a number of permutations of this in the law, in the necessity of treating the elderly, treating one's parents with respect, with care. There was not to be this idea of the older are simply to be cast off. There was to be a continued relationship throughout one's life within the family, and this was to be a part of the people of God. Verse 17, cursed is he who moves his neighbor's boundary mark, and all the people shall say, Amen. And we might say, well,